Hello, everybody. Welcome. Microphone is working. Thanks for coming to Community Conversations on this very rainy day. And thank you to our Zoom audience for tuning in as well. Next week, I want to remind you, we do not have an event. That is Veterans Day. Campus will be closed, but you can come back on the 18th and Karen Joyner will be talking about end-of-life care. So we're doing the very beginning of the life cycle today, and we'll be doing the end of the life cycle in 2 weeks. So I want to welcome today's speaker. Shiree Bent started college at Oregon State University, go Beavers, but after a few life-altering events, ended up completing her Bachelor's of Science in English Education at Emporia State University in Emporia, Kansas. After student teaching in a high school, she realized she wanted to educate an older demographic. She went on to get her Master's of Arts in English at ESU, focusing on identity and Holocaust autobiographies while teaching English composition for the college. After moving back to the Northwest, she started her career at LCC in 2014 in transitional studies. An avid lifelong learner, she found a real connection to adult basic education. In her spare time, she enjoys spending time exploring the outdoors, camping, day trips to the beach, and traveling with her husband and 2 children. Please welcome Shiree Bent.
Thank you, Courtney. Can everybody hear me okay? You guys okay? All right. Thank you for that introduction. My name is Shiree Bent. I teach over in transitional studies. Absolutely love what I do over there. But I also have a whole bunch of other outside interests besides teaching, and surrogacy was one of those. When Courtney emailed in the spring about doing this series for the theme of the fall of across the lifespan, I thought, surrogacy fits in there. There are a lot of different ways to create a family, and this is one such route. And so since I have become very versed in it throughout the last 3-4 years, I thought it would be kind of fun to share a little bit about it, and also can clear up maybe some misconceptions and myths surrounding it. There's it's one of those things that since there's not a whole lot known about it, we just kind of assume things that we know, and when we find out we're wrong, we're challenged, but that's okay. So I was a surrogate, yes, and I will talk to you a little bit about my journey through this as well. So I'm going to go over what it is. What does surrogacy even mean? Some of the terminology, just like with any field, you get into it after a while, and there's terms that are specific to it, and there's acronyms that go along with it that you may not be familiar with. But when you're on forums and social media and in certain areas, you don't say the full word as much as you don't have to. So there's a lot of acronyms. So I'll just throw a couple of those out since I say those. The requirements that go into being a surrogate, well, that is another thing that there's a couple different myths around that. So I wanted to talk about that. Obviously, the risks involved. This is a risky venture, no matter what. And surrogates that go into this need to be aware of those risks. There's legalities. Of course, there's legalities. So I'll talk about those, the myths, the process itself, and then my experience. I am hoping I have time at the end for questions if anybody has any. When asked in job interviews what my weakness was, I always said that I talk too fast, and I'm aware of that. When I interviewed here, my boss asked that, and I said, well, I'm a quick talker. And she goes, okay, then I'm not going to have you teach ESL. So probably a good idea. So I'll go as fast as I can, but not be too bad at this. Disclaimer though, I did want to put this out here. I'm not an expert on surrogacy, okay? I've completed one journey. I had a surrogate baby at the end of March last year, and I'm in the middle of a second one. I'll be carrying that baby's sibling starting next month at my transfer. So I am not an expert. I have a lot of experience, but I am by no means versed in everything surrogacy related. So I am not a reproductive endocrinologist. If I was, I probably would be too busy to be here right now. They are very in high demand. They are paid very well too. So just so you know, if you want to look into something. And I don't work for an agency, and I'm not looking to sign up surrogates. So this is not me recruiting right now, which is why I won't even mention the agency that I went through. I always just say, if you want more information, you can always contact me later, but that is not my purpose in being here. It's just more or less looking at the journey of surrogacy itself. So I'm not trying to make any money off of this or anything. So that's not my intent. The definition of surrogacy is it's an arrangement, obviously, between 2 parties supported by a legal agreement, okay? Whereby a woman agrees to carry a child for another person or persons who will then become the child's parents after birth. There are two different types of surrogacy. There is traditional, where the woman's egg is used and she is biologically related to that surrogate child. And then there is gestational. I was a gestational surrogate. I did not feel comfortable with one of my own biological children carrying it and then giving it to another family. So I was a gestational surrogate. Mad props to those that are traditional, but that just wasn't for me. And I will caveat, traditional has a lot more legalities that go in it, which is why it's illegal in multiple states, even to this day. So terminology and some of the common acronyms. The IP is the intended parents. These are the parents of the child after birth. Okay, so a lot of times you would just hear IP. You don't ever say intended parents, you just say IPs. I carried for 2 men, a gay couple. They were the IFs. It was one of the main reasons I went into surrogacy, is I wanted to carry for a same-sex couple. And I ended up with 2 men who live in San Francisco. Fantastic, wonderful people. The GC or the GS is a gestational carrier or gestational surrogate. Those are both used synonymously. The SM is a surrogate mother, but this term is no longer used in the community as much, partially because I'm not the mother to this kid. Obviously, I'm not planning on keeping it. I'm not planning on developing a bond to it. It's not mine. And so I'm not the mother, but then also in traditional couples, there is a mother who is planning on taking this child after birth. And it sounds kind of insensitive to say that I was the mother and then give it to another mother type of thing. So the word surrogate mother is not used as much in the community because it's kind of insensitive. Because it is an outdated, archaic term, a lot of agencies still use it in their advertising online, because as soon as you type in surrogate mother, a lot of different results will show up. So I have tried to work with my agency. I'm pretty involved at the agency that I was with to try to get them to take that out of their advertising, because it's not really a term that is used a whole lot anymore. Traditional surrogate is your TS. The agency is the company that matches the surrogates and the intended parents. Now, these guys are the ones who do all the background stuff. They connect us with the lawyers. They run the background checks. They help set up the match meetings so that they can match the 2 parties together based on the profiles and stuff that you fill out and what your wants and desires are and things like that. They are a great mediator between the intended parents and the surrogate. The agency is excellent for that. If you don't want to talk compensation, if you don't want to talk certain things, if you feel like you're uncomfortable, any part of the journey, you can talk to the agency and your case manager, and they'll help mediate between what's going on. The opposite of that obviously is an indie journey, is the independent one. This is when you don't use an agency. Agencies cost anywhere between $15,000 and $30,000 to use their services. So obviously the option of going indie is a very big thing for some people who want to save that amount of money. I will say, if you decide to go indie as a surrogate, there's no benefit to you at all. And you need to be a very assertive person if you are an indie surrogate, because you need to be okay with uncomfortable talks regarding compensation and situations and things like that. Same thing with the intended parents. If you are an indie intended parent, you need to be well-versed in the whole thing so that nobody is ending up with hurt feelings or in legal situations that maybe they didn't plan for. So an agency is great to help with those types of things, but you can see why an indie journey might be appealing to a lot of people. If you are using a family member or a friend, a lot of people go the indie route because they don't need the agency to match them up. They're already matched up. So that is kind of the difference between those two. The RE is their reproductive endocrinologist. This is your fertility clinic. These guys are the ones that are making the embryos and then transferring them into the surrogate. They can be there anywhere all over the United States, just like the agency. There's multiple all over the United States. This is a very, not to be insensitive, it's a very profitable industry. So there's a lot of them that pop up all over, of course, to say it, and not to be insensitive, but to be honest. The ASRM is the American Society of Reproductive Medicine. This is what dictates what the requirements and things like that should be in surrogacy. The RE has to follow the ASRM, basically. So when people complain, oh, I don't meet that requirement, oh, well, that's not your choice. A lot of times the RE is following what the ASRM has to say about it. If you find an RE that does not follow that, then you've hit some shady waters and you got to be a little bit more careful there. ART is your assisted reproductive technology. When you first start all of this and you get lawyers, you need to have lawyers who are versed in ART. because they are the ones writing the contract specific to this type of an arrangement. So it's very important to have an art attorney and to be art versed. And then IVF, that's the whole process that we're going through. It's your in vitro fertilization. The mock cycle, it may be a cycle. That term just means that it's the cycle that they put the surrogate on to see how well she's going to react to the meds, birth control, things like that. The blastocyst, this is what is the last stage of development that an embryo must reach before it's transferred into the uterus. So that's another misconception. People are like, oh, when they transfer a fetus in, they don't transfer a fetus in, they transfer a blastocyst in. There's no heartbeat at this point. This is just cells. This is the very first few days. And blastocysts that they transfer are anywhere between 5 and 6 days old. So that's kind of an important part. The transfer is when that embryo is transferred into the surrogate. It is not implanted into a surrogate. We are hoping it implants, but there is no guarantee. The whole surrogacy community in that sense is about a 50-50 chance out of all the REs, you get about a 50-50 chance that the embryo that you transfer actually will implant. I mean, it's a crapshoot, I'll just be honest. It's one of those things that you gotta be careful and don't get your hopes too high. Stay cautiously optimistic is what they say. And then you have your set versus det. Your set is your single embryo transfer and your det is your double. Back in the early days of all of this, it was very popular to transfer more than one embryo at a time into a woman's uterus. I mean, I'm sure you guys heard horror stories where they transferred like 7 into her, hoping that they would implant and things like that. That is insanely risky. There's a reason why that's like not legal anymore. A single embryo transfer is what most surrogates will agree to, because even with a single embryo transfer, you have a small chance of that thing splitting and becoming twins. If you transfer 2, the double embryo transfer, which most REs are not doing anymore, then both of them have the chance of splitting, right? So you're ending up with possibly 4 babies, maybe more. I had a surrogate who they transferred 1 and it split 3 times. She ended up with triplets, but then one of the babies ended up passing away early on. So she still ended up delivering twins. Double embryo transfers mean that you are accepting a very high risk pregnancy. You're accepting a higher chance of bed rest and possible problems, because just like with any twin pregnancy, there's more chances of complications. The beta, everybody says, I'm going to get my beta. This is your HCG level blood test. This happens anywhere between 9 and 12 days post-transfer. A lot of women will take a home pregnancy test to see if the transfer took and they're pregnant, but then it's not until the beta that you're actually confirmed pregnant. Most REs want a beta of over 50, and then they want to see it double every 24 hours. That means that the transfer actually worked and it's growing, it's a viable pregnancy. So DPT is your days post-transfer. That's used a lot. The donor egg is your DE. Now, like I said, if you're a traditional, you're using your own egg. But if you're a gestational, you're using somebody else's egg. If you are a couple, like for example, a gay couple, obviously neither one of them has an egg. So they get a donor egg from somebody else and then combine it with one of their sperm and then transfer it. So that's what DE means. And then we'll go more into what a PBO is later. It's your pre and post birth orders. Those vary depending on the state. Some of the major requirements, you need to be between 21 and 41. 21 so that you understand all the risks involved and you are okay with the fact that you are going to have a higher chance of secondary infertility, which is why they start off at 21 instead of 18. 41 because just like everybody, our uteruses are starting to wear out the older we get, and pregnancy gets harder on the body. And while your uterus may still work, there is a higher chance of it working better when you're under 40. So you must have delivered a child and be currently raising it. Intended parents put in anywhere between $75,000 and $150,000 into this process. So they want to make sure that you actually have a viable uterus that's going to work. Having delivered a child shows them that your uterus works. And then currently raising it is mainly because when you are done having that baby and you go home, you're a whole mess of emotions and hormones. And if you have your own children to cuddle, it makes it a lot easier than thinking that you're missing out on something, that something's not right. So having a child and raising it are very big things. You must have had successful pregnancies and births without complications. Again, this isn't obvious. You want to make sure that you are able to carry to full term, which is 36 weeks or beyond. If you have twins and you have them a little bit earlier on, they might accept you depending on a couple factors, but complicated free pregnancies and births. As much as I hate what the BMI is, it's an archaic old thing that just needs to be thrown away. The most REs want you to have a BMI of less than 32. It's not to discriminate against people who may be over a BMI of 32. It's to make sure that the meds that they give you are going to react the way they want them to react with your body. So that's the main reason behind it. And 32 is already even in the overweight category. So you don't have to be, stick figure thin to do this. They just want you to be less than 32 on the BMI scale, which needs to be thrown away. Or updated or something. That scale takes nothing into account, I swear. You cannot use tobacco, alcohol, or illegal drugs. Obviously, you should not have a history of antidepressants used for your postpartum depression or during pregnancy. Every time you get pregnant, you have a higher chance of postpartum depression. And because of that, they want to make sure that you were not reliant on antidepressants and that you are going to have a risk of getting that again. If you did have that, if some REs will accept you as long as you've been off of those meds for at least a year. But you're understanding that you have a higher risk of getting PPD again, pretty guaranteed with that next pregnancy. So it's a pretty risky thing, which is why a lot of places just don't want you to have any postpartum depression, antidepressant dependency. No more than 3 C-sections. Obviously, the uterus can only contract so many times back down. So the more you do major surgeries on it, the more risky that becomes. So they don't want more than 3 C-sections. You must be physically and mentally healthy, obviously. You must live in the US in a surrogate-friendly state. This is like the surrogate requirements in America, right? Canada's very loosey-goosey with their requirements. They just kind of do whatever they like to do and they have fun with it. This is the United States stuff. So obviously in the United States, you have to live in a state in a surrogate-friendly one. There are still 3 states that it is illegal to be a surrogate in, and that is Louisiana, Michigan, and Nebraska. And so you cannot be a surrogate in there. Washington only became legal to be compensated in 2019. So we're talking literally, it's been legal to be a compensated surrogate for 2 years here. Before that, you could only be an altruistic surrogate and do it for no money, which was great. But then Washington also likes to still stick in a little bit more of their regulations. You can only be a surrogate twice in the state of Washington. You can't do it more than that. California will allow you to be a surrogate 75 times. So it doesn't matter. They'll just keep going. They don't care what you do with your uterus, but Washington likes to still dictate that a little bit. So you must not participate in government aid programs. This is not to stigmatize. This is for 3 reasons. If you are on, this is like for TANF, for SNAP, or any of those government aid programs. If you are on one of those programs, you are saying that you meet a federal guideline for your income, which means that if you have to front some money for travel expenses, that if you can't be comfortable and come back home and still be able to pay your bills, you just risk your family and things like that. Secondly, you cannot rely on the compensation for a surrogacy pregnancy because it is not a guarantee. Like I said, the transfer has a 50-50 chance of taking, so there's a good chance that you may not end up pregnant, either the first, second, third transfer or ever. It just depends. So do not go into this thinking, oh, I'll just get compensated and then I can be done getting TANF or in one of those programs. And then the third one is the main big reason. Courts look at surrogates that are on government aid programs as someone who's been coerced into doing this, as someone who's been preyed upon by predatory intended parents. And so because of that, it risks the parentage of the intended parents, where they say, oh, it looks like you were trying to say, hey, we'll give you some money, you have our baby for us. But that's not the case with surrogacy in America. And so that is the main big reason. It risks the parentage of the parents if the surrogate is on any sort of government program. Again, not stigmatizing it. I was on those for years when I was younger. I'm just saying that's one of their requirements, and that's why. You must have the support of your family or partner, because this is a family venture in that sense. There's a lot of emotions and everything that ride on this. So to have somebody close by is really helpful. There's a few more. Surrogacy is not for the faint of heart. I had to stab myself with needles over 130 times, and that was just the first surrogate pregnancy. I start that again here in a couple of weeks. You must be okay with giving subcutaneous and intramuscular injections. Some women can't do it to themselves. I have no problem doing that, partially because my husband has the needle phobia, so he was zero help in this field. But you have to be okay with that. So you have to be willing to undergo a background check, and your partner does too, and any other adults that live in your house. They want to make sure that you are fit for this and that your partner is not dangerous or things like that, or there's other things going on. You have to be willing to undergo a psych evaluation. They want to make sure you're mentally aware of what's going to possibly happen so that you know the process and make sure that you are okay with all of that. And then you have to be willing to travel for the IVF process. Some women are lucky and they live close by to their fertility clinics. My fertility clinic is in San Francisco. So you have to be willing to go usually somewhere around out of the state is the majority of the time in order to go for a couple appointments. And then a couple possible requirements I threw on there. It's not very popular with the first one. Religious views might be dependent on the agency. Some agencies work with a lot of Jewish surrogates or have certain requirements when it comes to termination views. And it's usually backed by a religious view. So if that is something that you are looking into and you have those same views, great. But if it's not, be aware that they may deny you just based on that. And then the vaccination views with COVID this last year have really thrown the whole industry for a loop. In the beginning with vaccines, it was you do what you want, that's fine, it's up to you, it's however you want to go about it. ASRM has now come out and said pregnant women should be getting the vaccine, or if you're planning on becoming pregnant, you should get the vaccine. And so because ASRM said that, most REs are now requiring it. There are a few REs that are still kind of lenient on it. There's one in Hawaii, there's one in Colorado, there's one in New York, but most of the time now they're saying you need to get the vaccine. It's the same as any other vaccine in a pregnancy. You sign a big contract when you go into all of this saying that you're going to follow your OB/GYN's orders and all of this stuff, and you're going to follow all medical advice. Usually that involves some sort of vaccine like the flu vaccine. So that's why they're just going to start looping this one into the other ones that you also agree to take. Okay, some of the risks, you have your basic typical pregnancy risks, so I throw those up there. Most women know what those risks are. Nausea, back pain, weight gain, swelling, gestational diabetes, hypertension, damage to reproductive organs, miscarriage. When you look at all this, I sometimes wonder why we even go through all this. There's a lot of risks involved for just trying to have more babies for the world, but those are your typical pregnancy risks. Related to IVF specifically, you're going to possibly have needle bruising, allergic reactions to the meds themselves, premenstrual syndrome effects, cramping, bleeding. And then the big one that comes up is SCHs. The subchorionic hematoma is more popular with this, mainly because this is an atypical pregnancy that you are forcing to happen. So by transferring an embryo into a uterus, you're forcing it to be there in that one area, as opposed to a typical pregnancy where it just implants in the uterus anywhere it wants. Because of that, you may end up with more blood pooling around the area. It can be dangerous. A lot of women that get SCHs, they subside on their own and that's okay. But if you have a big one or you start bleeding or things like that, then you are stuck on bed rest for the whole rest of your pregnancy. And you need to be aware of that risk involved. Your employer wise, things like that, your family wise. And when I say bed rest, I mean bed rest. They don't want you doing anything. No house cleaning, no cooking, get up, go to the bathroom, eat your food in bed and stay there for the whole rest of the pregnancy. So they take this very serious when it comes to that, because there's a good chance that you'll end up popping that hematoma and then bleeding out, possibly killing you and the baby. So they're big on that one. And then with multiples, if you have an embryo that splits or you do a double embryo, you have a higher risk of preterm labor. You have a low birth weight risk, placental abruption, potential for C-section, things like that. I threw hormonal balance on there because yes, you do have a hormonal imbalance after. You have your typical regular feelings of having a baby and your hormones are all over the place. But you also have that one, like I said, where you just kind of want to cuddle something. You feel like I just had a baby. My body's telling me I should be holding and nurturing something. So your hormones are telling you that, and it's great to go home to your own children and to be able to do that, which is why that's a main requirement going into this. So typical risks. Your legalities that go with this, you do have lawyers. Like I said, they need to be versed in art. If they are not, then you need to get new lawyers because these guys are the ones that are writing up the contract. So they need to know everything that's involved in that. You need to have two lawyers, one for the surrogate and one for the intended parents. And both those lawyers need to be either licensed or practicing in the state that the surrogate lives, because those are the laws that go by it, since that's where she's most likely delivering. I will say also this, as a surrogate, nothing comes out of your own pocket. So everything is paid for by the intended parents. You will find some intended parents that are like, we don't need lawyers. We don't need a contract. It's my sister caring for me. It'll be fine. And that's where a lot of problems end up coming, because there's a lot of things that happen that you're not always expecting. And so lawyers are key. If you ever want to get into a surrogate pregnancy, you better have one. Do not forego it. You have contracts. The intended parents have a contract with the agency, and then the surrogate has a contract with the agency, and then we have one together. My contract is almost 40 pages long. This contract includes everything from compensation, when compensation will happen, any other things like that. What happens if the pregnancy stops being viable, or I have a miscarriage or something like that? Who the parents are, who's taking responsibility. COVID restrictions now is what's in all of the contracts that didn't used to be there before. Pre and post birth order ideas. Oh, I'm just saying, what it's everything and anything that could be in a pregnancy. My guys were fantastic. They didn't feel the need to dictate much in my life. They trusted me. I obviously had babies. I knew how to be pregnant. So my contract did not have any dietary restrictions or things like that, but there are some out there that do. And that has to be agreed upon before you match with each other. So pre versus post birth orders. Washington is a pre-birth order state, meaning my name never goes on the birth certificate. It's not my baby, it's not my egg. My name doesn't need to be on there. So before I have that baby, we fill out all this paperwork. It goes through the lawyers and everything, and they say, yes, these are the parents that'll be on there. Shiree has no legal responsibility, which means I have no decision-making skills or any of that I can do with this baby. So it establishes the parentage even before the baby's even born. Some states are a post-birth order state. It just means that they have to go through the extra step of, here's my baby, I had it through a surrogate, I'm in front of a judge. I'd like you to grant me the parentage to my own biological child. The judge says, okay, sounds good, stamp it. But like I said, Washington's a pre-birth order. And then your birth certificate, obviously, at the end. So, excuse me. Some of the myths that are surrounding it is that anyone can be a surrogate. Obviously, as you saw, not everyone can be. You still have to meet that lengthy list of requirements. And so obviously it's not true. Big one that a lot of people still think is that baby will look like the surrogate. It's not my baby, it's not my egg, it should not look like me, right? If it comes out looking like me with the same hair color, that's coincidence or something like that. But it does not usually, it doesn't usually, because it's not. It doesn't look like me at all. Because number 3, if people think that the surrogate passes DNA, cells, and blood to the baby, that's not true. I don't pass anything to the baby, so therefore it never mixes with the embryo at all, so it can't look like me. It can't have any of that. That one's kind of important because a lot of people think that that's kind of how IVF pregnancies go, but it's not true. The race, ethnicity, genes, blood type, all of that have no effect on the development of the baby. So myth number 4 is surrogacy is only an option for the wealthy or rich and famous. Like I mentioned, yes, this is a very expensive process. Anywhere between, let's see, I would say you'd be lucky if you could get it for $50,000, and you can go up to 150. And that is obviously, there's a lot of factors that play into that. The cost of making embryos alone is astronomical. The cost of insurance that you might have to get for the surrogate, you have the surrogate's compensation if she's being paid for it. There are still altruistic surrogates that don't get paid anything, or maybe are low comp. So that all goes into it. And then you have anything else that could come up, like the fact that if she's on bed rest for 4 months, you need to pay her wages and things like that she might be missing at work. That can be really expensive for some people. So it is not an option just for the wealthy, but it is obviously used more by that. I will say there are grant programs, there are loans out there, there are things that help intended parents come up with the money for this. The majority of them save for many years. They take out, home equity lines of credit, they take out things like that. They might get an inheritance. They might just work in an industry that pays very well, so they're able to save up faster. But it's not just an option for the super rich, I guess. Number 5 is the surrogate can keep the baby. This one is not true. This is not a Hallmark movie, right? Or what's that series, Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu? The surrogate runs off with the baby. First off, that's all wrong. That's just that whole thing was wrong. She couldn't even have been a surrogate, but whatever. I can't keep the baby. It's not mine. All the legal documents say that. So no, I cannot run off with them. Number 6, the parents will have trouble bonding with the baby after birth. This one always amazes me because there are so many children that are adopted through the system and nobody ever says to those parents, oh, did you have trouble bonding? I bet you can't bond with your baby. I think that that's ridiculous. There's obviously, you can bond with the baby. The dads were in the room when I delivered their daughter. They instantly grabbed her and held her, and it was just an outpouring of love. There was no trouble with bonding with your own child that way. So yeah, they may not be able to carry the baby, but it doesn't mean that they can't bond with it as soon as they're holding it in their arms. And then some actual intended mothers will induce their breastfeeding. They will actually induce that. And so they can even bond even more so with that. Number 7 says that only women under 30 should be surrogates. As you saw, I said that doesn't matter. The uterus doesn't age the same way our eggs do. So you can be a surrogate usually up to 42. The number 8 is that parents will have to adopt the baby after birth. The only time a parent may have to go through a slight adoption process is if one of the parents is not biologically related to the child. And so it looks similar to that, where they just go stand in front of a judge and say, I'm going to raise this child, blah, blah, blah. But the majority of the time, if it's a pre-birth order state, you don't go through any sort of adoption. Number 9, and I guess number 9, I say is up to you. That's how you feel about it. It's an unethical practice where women sell their bodies and intended parents profit off of vulnerable women. I don't know how many of you guys know me. I'm not a very vulnerable woman. I'm pretty outspoken on things. I never felt vulnerable going into this because this was my choice into doing this. I researched for a long time and looking into it. I did not feel like I was being taken advantage of in any way. This was my choice. So if you believe it's an unethical thing, I guess that's your own belief on it. But it is a very highly regulated practice in the United States. It's not the same in Ukraine and India and some of the other places where it's not as regulated. But for here in the US, women are choosing to do this. They're not being coerced into it. And I guess I don't see it as unethical. And then the last one, some people believe surrogacy is selfish when there are so many children waiting to be adopted or fostered. This is the one I got the most when I was pregnant. Oh, why don't they just adopt? That's so sad. A couple of my family members actually thought that that was appropriate to say to me while I was pregnant with another baby. But I looked at them who have had children of their own and I said, if you were so big into adoption, why didn't you adopt? And they're just like, well, because I wanted to have my own biological child. I said, well, what makes them any less deserving if they wanted to do the same thing? They're like, well, it's just wrong. It's just there's so many out there to adopt. The adoption process alone is very labor intensive. It's very expensive. It is up too close to the cost of surrogacy as it is. And the United States is not as forward thinking with LGBT as we like to think they are. So there are a lot of the LGBT folks that are still getting denied based on that alone. My guys were one of those people. They got denied because they are a same-sex couple, even in San Francisco, which is shocking. But they decided instead of adopting, they were going to go the surrogacy route. Also with adoption, the mother of the baby still has the option of changing her mind after she has that baby. So you're putting a whole bunch of time, risk, money into something that you may end up getting nothing out of. Whereas with surrogacy, it's all set up from the beginning that it's not mine and I can't do any decision. I can't change my mind about it or anything. So there is slightly of a different risk there for the intended parents. The last little bit of this is the process. This process was my process. So this is not the one and only. This is just what I went through. There are agencies and REs that do it a little bit different. I might switch up a couple of these things, but you get the idea. You have to fill out an intake form, find out if you meet all those qualifications. You meet with that agency if you're going the agency route. They get all of your medical and pregnancy records. So too bad if you have anything to hide because they go through it with a fine-tooth comb to see if you're even viable for this. You get your insurance reviewed and shocker, I know, Kaiser is not surrogacy friendly. Kaiser is an a-hole of a company. They will cover the surrogate pregnancy if they get reimbursed up to 100% in a lien of the compensation. So they're like, sure, we'll cover it. And then you pay us this much, which can be upwards of $50,000. That's insane. Kaiser is not my favorite. So because of that, you get a supplemental insurance and don't go through Kaiser or one that may not be surrogacy friendly. In the United States, there are hardly any that are surrogate friendly now. And so because of that, obviously it's a monopoly on plans that are friendly. And so they do cost a lot more money. But it is what it is. You can't control it, can't do anything about it. I can't control what the insurance company wants to do. And then you can they purchase life insurance for you. This is a risky project, obviously. So having that life insurance in place assures the surrogate's family that if something happens, they're not left high and dry. So that's part of the process. You fill out a profile about what you want to do, why you're going into this, a little bit about you and your family. Basically, you just try to toot your own horn about what an awesome person you are and send it off. And then the IPs do the same thing. They try to match you based on similar characteristics. My agency did fantastic. I matched with guys that are pretty much like brothers to me now. And so they did a great job of kind of connecting us. We went through a psychological evaluation, like I said. They do a home visit to make sure that your home is safe. They're not looking through your cupboards or in your underwear drawer or anything like that. They're just making sure that you do have a home, you live at the actual address that you gave them. You have running water. It's a safe place for a pregnancy. So then you do the medical screening. This is where they make sure you are good to go and you could transfer and you don't have any issues. Let's see, a couple weeks ago when I was in San Francisco, I had 14 vials of blood taken out because they test for everything. Then they also do a urine test during this time, make sure you're not smoking or doing anything illegal. After all of that to go, then you move on to contracts. Contract takes a little while. They have to talk back and forth with lawyers, sending back and forth if there's any things you want to change. My contract to the second round is very similar to my first. It's just updated with the COVID stuff. A couple other small updates, but everything else was the same. There wasn't a whole lot I wanted to change. So then you go to the med cycle. They put you on, every RE has its own plan for meds. Mine does Lupron and progesterone. The Lupron goes in my stomach. It suppresses my ovulation so that I can't get pregnant with my own baby during this time. And then the progesterone happens about a week before you transfer, and then for about 8 weeks after. Depends on the RE. So I will mention that the progesterone that you take is a lot more than you would normally have in your body during a typical pregnancy, because I am trying to convince my body not to throw away the embryo that they just placed in there. And so you kind of are like hyper aware of pregnancy. So you're kind of moody during this time. I'll just word it nicely that way. You kind of snap at your family a lot and you don't mean to, but it just falls out because you are just loaded with progesterone. I will also mention your progesterone is a hormone. There are risks that go with that. Because my family is predisposed to a lot of breast cancer, I had to go through an extra step the second round in regards to a mammogram and genetic counseling and stuff like that. Because if you have any of those types of issues that might pop up, the hormones that you take can exacerbate that, obviously. So they want to make sure that you are good to go in that sense too. Then you do the embryo transfer, you have the pregnancy, you have the baby, you go home and go to bed. So, I mean, that's your basic process. This is not the baby I had, but it looks a lot like that. So that was close enough. Legally with my contract, I can't name who the parents are, who the baby is, or show pictures and things like that, which is their privacy right. So I have no issue with that. Same thing with them back, unless we give each other permission. And so I had a little girl. She looked a lot like that. She was cute and smiley and squishy and things like that. I did my pre-journey just involved doing a lot of research, looking into it. I wanted to do this years ago when my kids were young, but after finding out that there's a lot of lifting restrictions and possible bed rest, I didn't think that would be fair to pursue it while they were still little. So I waited until they got a little bit older. Had my discussions with my family. I will say that my husband was not for this and gung-ho at the beginning because he thought we were using my own egg and didn't want to give one of our babies to somebody else. He's like, if we're gonna have babies, we're keeping it, it's ours. But I had to explain it wasn't my egg. Once he became more versed in the process, he understood more. And he was with me, is still with me, and he doesn't regret it. Because like I said, the guys that I carried for are fantastic people. I chose the agency. You do not have to choose an agency that's close by. I did choose one that's based out of the Northwest because they were highly reviewed, very well known. There was a lot, they've been around for many, many years, things like that. But that's the only reason I chose them. Submitted everything, it takes a while, had my match meeting with the guys, had to fly down to San Francisco and do the Pacific Fertility Clinic. That's where my RE is. Had the transfer, everything went great. I will say I had a fantastic pregnancy. I don't really have anything to complain about with that. I love being pregnant. It was one of the reasons I went into this, but I didn't want any more of my own. So I had a very smooth pregnancy, no complications. COVID threw everything for a loop. Like I said, I had her at the end of last March, right when the height of everything was getting going. because of that, when I hit 39 weeks, my OBGYN was like, we can induce you, and that way there's a better chance that the guys can be in the room, because the hospitals were starting to have more and more restrictions. When I went into this, my contract specifically states that my husband will be in the room with me no matter what. Even if that means he's the only one that can be in there, that is very important to me. He's my other half and my comfort person, so I need him in there. The guys were totally okay with that. They were like, we understand completely. He's your person. And so we got lucky that he was able to be in there, and both guys were, because a week later, Legacy said no visitors, no nothing. We literally missed it by a week. Whew, we got lucky. So they all got to be there. They helped pull her out and cut the cord and had their skin to skin contact and everything. So it worked out fantastic in that sense. Some surrogates go into this wanting to have the baby given to them first so they can like ceremoniously pass it to the parents. I was not one of those. I don't need to love on the baby first. It's not my baby. I want them to have, just like I wanted my own. So I didn't need to do any of that. So they took her and had their time. I still nursed her at the hospital. But other than that, I didn't have as much contact, and that was okay with me. I was fine with that. It sounds really weird to say that, because it's like when you have babies, you think you should be instantly connected with that. But I didn't. I went into this from the very beginning knowing I wasn't taking anything home. I didn't plan out a name. I didn't build a nursery. I didn't do any of the stuff that you do usually when you're planning on having children. So by the time I had her, it was like nothing had changed. I just had her. Now I could drink again and exercise harder, right? Like, and sleep at night. So it was like one of those things that was like, moving on to the next stage. And so that's the main reason I chose to do a second journey, partially because I absolutely love these guys. They asked me to carry the little brother for them. I said, absolutely, of course, I love it. This will be my last pregnancy, and I'm excited to do it again for them. So that's all I can think of right now that I wanted to share with you guys, but thank you for having me today. I did want to say, if you have any questions, to ask them. Also, I have my email there if you have any other questions that come up later on. So
Great. Thank you so much.
Of course.
I'm going to launch off with questions because I have the mic and I get to do that.
please.
I'm on a power just a little background here. I attended Brandeis for a year, which is a predominantly Jewish institution. And I noticed one of the things I noticed was in the student newspaper were ads for egg donations. And they said, up to $5,000 or something, up to 10,000 if you're Jewish. And I was like, what's going on with this? And so I had a Jewish friend, because I am not Jewish, explain to me, or I'm 7/8 not Jewish, I should say. I'm not practicing. And they explained that because Jewish identity is carried through the maternal line, that for many conservative families in the Jewish tradition, that they believe that having an egg from a Jewish woman is significant to their religious identity. And so that kind of speaks to the idea of, what are your shared values and what are your religious convictions on that? Do you see any other examples of how like religion, you mentioned, now I'm feeling bad about this question. I think you mentioned like termination, obviously.
Yes.
You got to agree on that.
Yeah.
It's a very big one. Do you see any other examples of how like political beliefs or religious beliefs, something like that?
So political beliefs just means that you're most likely matching with somebody that might come up with. Now, I can tell you, we never talked politics with my guys. It had nothing to do with the pregnancy or our lives together. So I would say if that is something that you believe strongly and you would just put that in your profile of what side you might lean on. Religious beliefs they're going to be mainly with things like no termination. When you go into this, they ask you what your views are on termination. Are you okay terminating based on birth defects, something that might come up, less viable pregnancies if it's twins, things like that? Are you okay with that? If you say no, they just put that in your profile. And you say, no way, I don't want to terminate. Even if I die in the process, I have zero desire to want to terminate. Or yes, I don't mind terminating, that's their baby, things like that. So that is a big one that would come up when it is in regards to religion, just because some religions believe stronger in that than others. I am all for the parents making that choice. And so I was like, I'm for termination if that's their choice to do so. Most places won't terminate unless they absolutely have to, obviously, if the baby passes, has a lot of defects or something like that. Of course, it's not like they're just doing this willy-nilly. They did used to do that where you could just terminate based on, oh, it's a twin pregnancy, I don't want the second one. But that became very illegal. You can't do that now. It has to be because of some problem. So, but it's not my baby I'm raising, so it's up to them on what they want to do that. So that's the only time that I saw that come up. With the Jewish stuff, it would come up with, are you going to live a kosher lifestyle as a surrogate? Are you going to live and have dietary restrictions that follow the Jewish lifestyle? that was where that would come up with religion in regards to that. And some intended parents are like, we don't care either way because the baby, like you said, already has the maternal line, or we do care strongly and we want you to only eat this type of stuff. If they do that, that's in your contract. They have to pay for all that food for not only you and your family because you're changing everything for that. So that's the only thing.
Okay, thank you. All right, questions.
I've got three questions. First one's in regards to the myths. The second one is two-part in regards to the contract. So in the myths, so you said the surrogate doesn't pass DNA cells and blood to the baby at all?
Correct. It's not mine. The baby, the placenta is made through the fraternal line. So it doesn't come out of me at all. That's what they've proven with science. Again, I'm not a reproductive endocrinologist. I already warned you with that.
Oh, yeah,
So-
I got that.
Yeah, they say it has not, that nothing is transferred from the surrogate to the baby.
And then-
Now, new studies have shown that cells are transferred from the baby to the surrogate. That's a new one that's been coming out the last few years. So I do have some of her cells left in there that she can transfer out, usually during birth.
Okay.
I'm a superhero, pretty much, yeah.
Because they say
Right, look
like the umbilical cord that, you know, if a child has a disease or something later on down in life and they still have the umbilical cord, they could get harvest those cells to help them get better.
Stem cells and things like that come from the actual development and the DNA of the placenta, which is not mine, which is developed from the actual DNA of the embryo itself. So
Okay.
yes.
And then the other one is regarding to the contract. So what happens, for example, the surrogate dies in a car crash and the IP or IF wants to bury the child that's still in the surrogate? Does it have to be in the contract, or
come
you know
up
what I'm
with-
saying?
It's a brutal question.
But it's
Um,
it happened. It's like there's a family that
Yes.
goes on vacation or something and something happens and it's like, oh crap, you know.
Right.
But does it have to state in the contract that they want that child to be buried with them or that later on? You know what I'm
So
saying?
they have zero rights over my body whatsoever in that sense. That is all from advance directive. That's all from my will. That's all from things like that. I have that choice. Even up to the end, I can only make medical decisions for my body, or my designated person can. So even in regards to that, if I passed away with the baby still inside, they could ask my husband, well, can we cut the baby out and bury it? And my husband can say, no, it's not, you can't do that. So they do not have the right in that sense. It sounds like they would because it's their investment in a way. It sounds terrible to say that, right? But it's their investment. And it sounds like they could have that right, but it's still my body no matter what. And Washington State is really good on that it is my choice no matter what happens to my body in regards to how delivery happens, what meds I take, if I want an epidural, things like that is my choice 100%. I'll take them into consideration, but they don't not going to make that decision.
Understand it's your body, but yeah, as you explained, you don't pass the DNA. and
It's
their
still my
DNA
body
is-
until it exits my body. It's mine entirely to do with as I please, which is why you might have some people that want to terminate and you have surrogates that say, I changed my mind, I don't want to. They can still carry that baby to full term because nobody can force you to terminate if you don't want to. Once they carry that baby, they pay everything back to the intended parents and now they're responsible for raising that. But it's still your body to do with until it comes out. And literally until it comes out, I have no decision making. I have all decision making. After that, it's all on them. Which is why as soon as it comes out, it goes on the parents' insurance and things like that, because it's its own person that they own now. But that's a good question. That's a good question.
And then the last one, I've known some IF couples that did this. So they mixed, instead of knowing who was going to be the father, they just mixed their sperm and decided, hey, he looks like you. We don't know. We don't want to know this is going to be your child or not. What if the IF decide to use both sperm and not know who the father will be? Are there changes because of health reasons that may come up, or does it go back to the contract?
Everything's going to go back to the contract. Do you know that they actually specifically mixed it? Because as far as I know, they won't mix sperm. They'll make embryos with one dad's and the other dad's, but they're not going to put them together.
That's what I was told, is
Uh,
that they decided to, they didn't know,
That
want to know
seems
who.
super unethical. What they'll do usually is make two embryos and this is from this dad's and this is from this dad's. And then they'll decide which one's higher rated enough to possibly transfer. I don't know that they would mix. That's the same thing as saying, I'm just going to throw two girls' eggs in and see which one it might take with. Like, that seems a little bit weird, but maybe that's their case.
Maybe
I'm just not
that's
versed in
what
that.
they probably used. Learn the term. No, not sure. The process,
Which one?
oh man. Uh, process.
So many notes. That's good.
Surrogate mother, independent attorney.
We can, if you find it, you can come back.
Yes.
Yeah, that's fine.
Okay.
Everything's still going to usually go back to the contract. I agree to up to 3 transfers. Whose transfer that is, which dad's that is, would be decided upon in the beginning. But you're right. That usually would still go back to whatever the contract is going to say. Yes, ma'am.
Great job, Shiree. I know that you and I have talked about this in the past. So, and I missed a couple minutes in the beginning. So you had mentioned that in this next round that they're looking for a son. So my question was in the IVF process, are they starting to determine the gender of the baby?
Yes, that's been going on for the last decade or so. So when you first create embryos, you have the option of doing PGT testing, and PGT testing tests all possible genetic defects that could be there. So here's the process. A woman donates X amount of eggs. We only ovulate 1 egg a month, but when you are an egg donor, you are given a massive amount of eggs or meds in order to up that so that you have more. Once those eggs are donated, they go through a process of freezing, then they're defrosted. They're combined with sperm. After that, they see how it works. They see if it's going to develop, if it's going to die. If it does start to develop, they do PGT testing to see if there's any abnormalities. If there are abnormalities, those are thrown away usually, obviously, because there's a pretty high chance that it's not going to implant. And then also just because parents don't want abnormalities. With that, finally at the end, then you transfer usually the best quality ones. During PGT testing, you can see what the chromosomes are, which means you can see what sex the baby will be. Some parents choose to choose that, and I want a girl first and a boy next. Some of them just say, just transfer the highest quality one. I don't care what comes out of it, leave it a surprise. If that's the case, it's just like a regular pregnancy where they won't reveal the sex during an ultrasound, and then it might just be a surprise at the very end. Sometimes that comes up later during other testing. But yes, nowadays you can choose. It sounds terrible to say that. I know that we're getting on designer baby realm here, and that's why a lot of people have problems with this. But you can choose which one because you know from the testing if it's a male or female. So
Fascinating to see sort of what the updates are from, I had my kids 16 and 18 years ago, and a little more ART than I would have liked to, when I was doing the process. And it seems like both the technology has improved drastically, but also the ethical standards have
Yes.
improved drastically. And that's really nice to see, quite frankly.
yes.
Yeah. Okay. We have an update.
Indy,
The what?
Indy. It looks like they utilized the Indy process.
The last NB process? Oh, independent. Sorry. Thank you. I don't hear too well. The independent process. So like I said, the only difference with that is that you don't have an agency that's mediated between the two of you. That's the only difference. You still go through everything else the same. You go through all testing, lawyers, everything else the same with an indie process. That's the only difference. Most of those processes are done by family or friends to try to save the parents maybe the agency fee. So, but that's about the only difference. Again, like I said, it usually goes back to the contract, which is why that contract is so detailed. So.
Okay, well, thank you so much.
Well,
Thank you,
you.
Shiree, for sharing your journey with us. I learned a ton. I hope everybody else did. And please don't come back next week, but come back in 2 weeks.
2
Thank
weeks.
you.
Thank you, guys.